The galaxy had once been united under the banner of the Galactarian Coalition, a beacon of peace and cooperation across the stars. Its fleets were mighty, its technologies unrivaled, and its people diverse yet harmonious for centuries. It had been a force of stability among the stars, keeping the chaos of the universe at bay. The Coalition had forged alliances with hundreds of species, each contributing to the greater whole, each adding their unique strengths to the collective defense. But all that changed when the Xothra arrived from the depths of the unknown regions. They came without warning. Their ships emerged from the dark expanse like shadows, swallowing the light of distant suns. They were unlike any species the galaxy had ever encountered. Their technology was beyond comprehension. Their weapons shattered entire fleets in moments, their strategy cold and calculated with military precision. They took no prisoners. Their purpose was singular and terrifying. They would cleanse the galaxy of all who stood in their way, leaving only destruction in their wake. The first planet they attacked fell within hours. Its defenses crumbled under the force of the Xothra's advanced weaponry. Their ships tore through the planet's atmosphere, with ease leveling cities and reducing the once vibrant world to ashes. The survivors were left to scatter into space, fleeing for their lives. But it was only the beginning. One by one, the Coalition's planets fell, their once proud fleets reduced to burning debris. In the void, the Xothra did not give mercy. They did not negotiate. They simply annihilated those who resisted, leaving a trail of silence. In their wake, entire species vanished from existence. Some were wiped out entirely, others enslaved and subjugated to serve the Xothras. Well, the galaxies watched in horror as the greatest empire ever known to the stars began to collapse. The Coalition's leadership scrambled for solutions. They called for reinforcements, but their distress signals were answered by only more death. Each attempt to rally their forces ended in failure. Their once invincible warships were helpless against the Xothra onslaught, and their defense networks collapsed in a matter of hours. It became clear the galaxy was facing an existential crisis, one they had no answer for. The Xothra were not like any enemy they had ever fought. They did not fight for resources or land. They fought for complete and utter domination, and they would stop at nothing to achieve it. The Coalition was at its breaking point. Worlds fell in rapid succession. Entire species were wiped from existence. Their cities burned, their legacies forgotten. Every resistance movement that rose was swiftly crushed under the weight of the Xothra's might. But even as the darkness spread across the stars, the hope of survival lingered in the minds of the few who remained. Hidden in the shadows of space were whispers of a species long feared and long avoided: humans. The humans of Earth had always been a mystery to the greater galactic community. While other species reached for the stars and embraced the ways of the universe, humanity had kept to itself, its future uncertain and its potential unseen. The Xothra had long viewed humans as little more than a nuisance beneath their notice. But now, in the face of annihilation, the leaders of the Coalition found themselves asking one simple question: could the humans be the galaxy's last hope against the Xothra? The answer seemed impossible, but it was the only one they had left. So they turned their eyes to Earth and prepared to make contact, hoping against hope that the humans would rise to the occasion, even if they had no idea what kind of force they were truly dealing with. The leaders of the Coalition met in a hidden chamber deep within the remains of their once glorious capital, the last gathering of their kind. The atmosphere was heavy with despair as their fleets were shattered and their colonies falling to the Xothra, their faces drawn with the weight of imminent extinction. The silence between them was suffocating, each one of them knowing what had to be said, but no one daring to voice the thought first. The Xothra had shown no mercy, and their destruction was relentless. Entire species had been wiped out without so much as a second thought, and the Coalition found itself on the brink of collapse. Some argued for surrender, others called for retreat to hidden sectors where the Xothra might never find them. But the thought of letting the invaders wipe out their entire galaxy was unbearable. There was no longer any hope of survival without a drastic measure, and so the conversation turned to the one option they had not dared to consider for centuries: the humans of Earth, the very species the Coalition had once deemed primitive and backward, unworthy of interstellar alliance. and far too unpredictable to be trusted. Many of the leaders scoffed at the idea the humans had always been a chaotic species, their technology underdeveloped, their society fractured, and often at war with itself. Yet even they could see that no matter how flawed humanity was, they possessed an undeniable strength, a wildness, a fire that no other species had. They had survived wars and calamities that would have broken lesser civilizations. Their resilience was a testament to their spirit, and in their reckless defiance of the impossible, there was a possibility, a sliver of hope that might just turn the tide against the Xothra. The problem was no one knew how to reach them. No one had ever truly understood humanity. Their communication with the galaxy had been sporadic and secretive at best. They had remained isolated, refusing to join galactic councils or share their advancements with the larger community. Their ships were few and far between, and even the Coalition's best diplomats struggled to bridge the gap. The Xothra had underestimated them for years, but now the very species the galaxy had once ignored was the only chance left to fight back. Desperate messages were sent to Earth. The Coalition's remaining fleet, its command center shattered, took to the stars, sending a single envoy to Earth, a small, seemingly insignificant ship that carried their hopes, but also the weight of their desperation. They had no idea what to expect, no clue as to how humanity would react. But there was no other choice. The first contact was nothing like the galactic meetings they had hoped for. The humans were not eager to join an alliance, nor were they willing to bend to anyone's will, but they were curious. The envoy was met with suspicion and fear as Earth's leaders received the message from the stars to the humans. The invasion was a distant threat, far removed from their daily struggles, and the idea of getting involved in a war that was not their own seemed absurd at first. But as the reality of the Xothra's power began to take hold, Earth's resolve started to change. It was not fear that drove them, but a deep sense of defiance, a need to fight back against the destruction that was sweeping across the galaxy. Humanity, in all its chaotic brilliance, found a new resolve as they saw the stars above their heads darken with the shadow of war. They did not know what they could offer the galaxy or how they could fight such an enemy, but they knew they would not go quietly into the night, not when their survival was on the line. And with that, a fragile alliance began to form, one that would soon be tested in ways no one could have predicted. The humans were not accustomed to galactic politics. They had spent centuries fighting their own wars, struggling to survive in an unforgiving universe. Their technology had not yet evolved to the level of the other species of the Coalition, and their world had been fragmented by internal strife and division. But as the envoys from the Coalition explained the scope of the threat, humanity found itself staring into the abyss. The idea that an enemy so powerful could be defeated seemed impossible, yet the humans had always thrived in the face of impossible odds. Their history was one of constant struggle, but also of remarkable survival, and against all logic they began to consider that perhaps they were the galaxy's only hope. At first the leadership on Earth hesitated. No one wanted to send their people to die in a war that was not theirs, a war against an enemy whose power they barely understood. But then came the first images of the Xothra's destruction, entire cities burning in the wake of the invasion, entire species eradicated without mercy. The fear began to spread across the planet as humanity realized that they could no longer ignore the truth. Their world was not immune to the Xothra, and even if they could survive on their own, the rest of the galaxy would fall under the Xothra's relentless assault, and with it the humans would be alone in the darkness. So humanity began to make preparations. They called upon their brightest minds, their military leaders, and their innovators to come together and find a way to fight back. The Coalition provided them with resources and knowledge, but humanity would have to rely on its own ingenuity to stand a chance. Their engineers quickly got to work adapting their technologies, learning what they could from the alien ships and weapons they had access to. But it was not their technology alone that would set them apart. It was their resourcefulness, their ability to think outside the box, and their willingness to break every rule of conventional warfare to create something unexpected. The Xothra had been used to fighting wars where everything was calculated, where strategies were rigid and predictable. But humanity was different. They did not fight by the same rules. Their unpredictability and chaotic nature made them a wild card. that no one could truly understand or anticipate, and that unpredictability would become their greatest weapon. The humans were not content to simply replicate the technology of their allies. They knew they would have to innovate and adapt in ways no one expected. They began to develop unconventional tactics that threw off the Xothr's understanding of warfare. They employed guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run strategies and traps, designed to confuse and disrupt the enemy. Rather than rely on brute force, they would strike where the Xothra least expected. They would take risks and make sacrifices, knowing that every battle fought was one step closer to saving their galaxy. The military command of Earth was also quick to organize resistance forces around the world. As each nation rallied to support the effort, they knew the fight would not be easy. They knew many would die, but they also knew that without action, there would be nothing left to fight for. And so the first fleets were built. The human forces began to rally under a banner of survival and defiance. They were not a unified species in the way the coalition had been, but they had something far more powerful than that: a shared belief in their own ability to overcome the odds, and a burning desire to prove that humanity would not fall to the darkness of the Xothra. The message spread across the globe: humanity was no longer a passive observer in the galaxy. They were now a part of something far bigger than themselves, a galaxy-spanning war in which their future and the future of countless others would be decided. And though the Xothra had underestimated them for years, the humans were ready to prove that they were not the weak link in the chain, but the very force that could break it wide open. As the first human fleets began to take shape, and the resistance forces rallied, humanity quickly realized they could not rely on traditional methods of warfare to face the Xothra. They would have to be more than just soldiers. They would have to be thinkers and innovators. Their military leaders gathered to discuss their strategy. But the truth was they had no clear path ahead. The Xothra's advanced technology and overwhelming numbers were enough to crush any conventional army, but humanity's greatest strength lay in its refusal to be bound by the rules of war. Their minds worked in ways no other species could understand, and this chaotic brilliance would be their key to survival. Humanity began to adapt quickly. They repurposed old military tech and weapons, integrating it with new alien technologies. They scavenged from coalition ships. Their engineers worked day and night, pushing the limits of human creativity to build systems that were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Stealth devices designed to confuse the Xothra sensors, decoy ships built to lure the enemy into traps, and electronic warfare systems that could disrupt the Xothra's communication networks. Their weapons were not the most advanced, but they were designed with one thing in mind: unpredictability and sheer power. Human soldiers trained relentlessly, learning to use their environments to their advantage. They adapted alien combat tactics, blending them with their own unique fighting styles, and quickly became known for their unconventional methods. In the face of the Xothra's might, the human army was no longer a predictable force. It was a wild, unpredictable wave of chaos that the Xothra could not anticipate. Their first skirmish with the Xothra ended in a bloody draw, but it sent a message: the humans were not as weak as the invaders had thought. They were relentless and capable of fighting back, despite their lack of advanced technology. The Xothra began to realize they were facing an enemy they could not fully understand. Their warships, designed to destroy entire planets, were vulnerable to the unpredictable tactics humanity employed. The humans didn't fight like the other species. They didn't follow the traditional laws of war. They used their knowledge of their own environment, their ability to outthink and outmaneuver an enemy much stronger than themselves. They created traps that the Xothra could not foresee, ambushed their fleets in ways the invaders could not counter, and hit them where it hurt most in their pride. Humanity was starting to turn the tide against the Xothra, but the real battle was yet to come. The coalition watched in astonishment as the humans proved themselves time and time again. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were showing the galaxy a new way of fighting, and with each battle they won, they inspired others to join their cause. Alien species that had once feared humans now looked to them for leadership. Those who had been enslaved by the Xothra saw in humanity a beacon of hope. The humans were not just fighters, they were symbols of resistance. They proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, even when the universe seemed lost, there could always be a way forward. And though the Xathra grew more ruthless with each failed attempt to crush the humans, they could not contain the rising wave of defiance. Humanity's presence in the war was no longer a mere possibility. It was becoming an unstoppable force, one that would forever change the future of the galaxy and the fate of every living being in it. As humanity's tactics grew more daring and effective, the Xathra found themselves increasingly frustrated. Their once immovable confidence began to crack. The humans refused to be defeated. They fought not with the same strength and technology that the Xathra wielded, but with an ingenuity and unpredictability that disrupted everything the invaders had come to expect. The Xathra had long dominated their enemies. With cold calculation, their warships and strategies were all based on precision and overwhelming force. But humanity was different. They didn't fight by the rules. They didn't follow the path laid out for them. They fought like the storms. They were a chaotic force of nature, unpredictable and fierce. The humans used their limited resources in ways no one had ever thought possible. They launched surprise attacks on Xathra supply lines, sabotaged their energy reserves, and spread fear throughout the enemy ranks. Their technology was crude compared to the Xathras, but it was adaptable. It could evolve on the fly, and that was something the Xathra were not prepared for. As the war raged on, humanity began to create weapons of their own, not just in terms of technology, but in the way they fought. Each battle was a new experiment in unconventional warfare. They didn't just attack the enemy, they attacked their way of thinking. They forced the Xathra to question everything they had believed about warfare. The first major success came when a human fleet ambushed a Xathra battalion on a seemingly insignificant moon. They used terrain to their advantage, striking with such ferocity and unpredictability that the Xathra were caught off guard. They used the moon's surface to create false signals and distractions, making the enemy believe they were facing a far larger force than they actually were. The Xathra were lured into a trap, and their fleet was decimated. In the chaos that followed, the humans captured an entire Xathra warship, a valuable piece of technology that the Coalition could only dream of acquiring. The message was clear: humanity had learned how to fight back, and more importantly, they had learned how to make the Xathra afraid. The Xathra had long believed that their enemies could not challenge them on their own terms, but humanity was proving them wrong with each passing victory. The humans were demonstrating that it was not just power that could defeat the Xathra, it was willpower, cunning, and the ability to adapt to an ever-changing battlefield. This was something the Xathra could not foresee. Their once impenetrable forces were now facing an enemy they couldn't predict, and that fear began to spread through their ranks. The humans had begun to make their mark in the war. They were no longer the weak species that had been dismissed by the Xathra, but a force to be reckoned with. Their soldiers were no longer simply fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. And every small victory they claimed fueled a greater fire of resistance. The Xathra began to question their own superiority. They could no longer simply crush humanity with brute force. They had to think and act differently. But that was something they had never had to do before. The humans had shown them a new path, one that the Xathra were not ready for, a path that could lead to their downfall. Humanity was not just fighting to preserve their own survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. And that was a battle the Xathra would soon realize they could not win. The war had taken a new turn. Humanity was no longer merely defending itself, but becoming an active threat to the Xathra's dominance. The unexpected victories, their guerrilla tactics and innovations, had shaken the invaders to their core. They could no longer rely on their overwhelming strength and technological superiority. Humanity's ability to adapt to every new challenge had left them scrambling to stay one step ahead. The first decisive shift came when a small human fleet launched an attack on a heavily fortified Xathra stronghold. The stronghold was meant to be impenetrable, a bastion of invulnerability, but the humans turned it into their battleground, using the planet's resources to their advantage. They infiltrated underground bunkers and sabotaged communication networks, and they did it all without the Xathra ever realizing what was happening. The humans didn't engage in direct confrontations. They didn't fight according to any known strategy. They simply attacked where the enemy least expected it, in the dead of night, in the dark corners of space, and within their own strongholds. When the battle ended, the Xathra were left in shock, their once perfect defenses now in ruins, and their war machine. Temporarily crippled, it was a blow they had not anticipated, and it sent a ripple of panic through their command. They began to realize that humanity was no longer a nuisance. They were a serious threat. The Xathra now found themselves facing a new kind of warfare, one that was not based on direct combat, but on subversion and disruption. Humanity's strength was not in its raw power, but in its ability to undermine the Xathra's carefully constructed empire. The humans attacked communication systems to confuse the enemy, they sabotaged energy supplies to cripple their fleets, and they introduced psychological warfare to break the will of the Xathra soldiers. Each victory was small but significant, and they added up quickly. The Xathra began to make mistakes they had never made before. They underestimated the humans, thinking them too chaotic to be organized, too unpredictable to be effective. But it was precisely those traits that made the humans so dangerous. As the humans continued their sabotage efforts, they struck at the heart of the Xathra's control over their slaves. The Xathra ruled through fear and dominance, but humanity knew that no empire could stand without the loyalty of its people, and so they began to sow the seeds of rebellion among the Xathra's subjugated races. They inspired uprisings and coordinated strikes with the slaves, giving them a fighting chance against their cruel masters. The Xathra had not considered the possibility that their own subjugated peoples could rise up and join the fight. Humanity's unconventional tactics were starting to turn the tide in their favor, and the Xathra were growing desperate. Their once unquestionable dominance was being chipped away piece by piece. Each skirmish, each disruption forced them to change their tactics. But the humans adapted faster. The Xathra knew they had to act quickly or risk losing everything. They gathered their forces for a counterattack on Earth. They believed that if they could crush the human homeworld, they could snuff out the resistance once and for all. But they underestimated the power of the human spirit. The humans knew the Xathra were coming, and they were ready. The entire planet rallied to defend their world. Every nation set aside their differences to unite against the common enemy. They worked together to build defenses unlike anything the Xathra had seen. And when the Xathra finally arrived to launch their assault, they found themselves facing an enemy that had prepared for them every step of the way. Humanity's resolve had hardened, and they were no longer just defending their home. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. And as the first Xathra warships breached Earth's atmosphere, they encountered not just soldiers, but a planet united in its defiance. It was humanity's moment to prove that they would not be the galaxy's downfall, but its salvation, and the Xathra were about to face a battle they were not ready for. The Xathra fleets descended upon Earth with the full force of their war machines. Their massive warships loomed in the skies, casting a shadow over the planet's surface. The invasion had begun, and the entire world held its breath, waiting for the first wave of destruction. Yet what the Xathra had not anticipated was the sheer scale of humanity's preparation. Every continent had contributed to the defense of Earth. Humanity's military forces were not just defending cities or key infrastructure. They were fighting for the very existence of their species, and they were ready to do whatever it took to ensure their survival. When the first Xathra ships breached the atmosphere, they were met with a barrage of firepower unlike anything they had ever faced. Earth's defenses were not conventional. They were not designed to hold off a fully equipped invasion force, but they were designed with one key principle in mind: adaptability. The humans had used every resource at their disposal, from the remnants of old space stations to newly developed technologies. They had created a series of layered defenses that could be shifted and adapted as the situation required. Massive anti-ship artillery fired into the air, tearing through the Xathra warships with precision strikes. Smaller fighter crafts engaged the Xathra in dogfights above the planet's surface, swarming the invaders with unexpected agility and speed. They fought in a way that no other species had dared. They used their environment to their advantage. The human forces were not about brute strength, but about endurance and cunning. With every engagement, they proved that they could fight in ways the Xathra could not predict. The tide of the battle turned quickly as the humans forced the Xathra to fight on multiple fronts. They could not keep up with the relentless onslaught of human tactics, And before long, the invaders were no longer just fighting humanity, they were fighting the entire planet as one cohesive force. Earth's defense networks were completely activated. Every major city was connected in a web of coordinated resistance. Each sector of the planet fought as one. Each nation worked together in ways they never had before, and the Xhothra found themselves stretched thin, unable to concentrate their forces in one place without leaving others vulnerable. But it was not just the human military that was holding their ground. Ordinary citizens also fought back. They took up arms to protect their families, their homes, and their world. They were not trained soldiers, but they were driven by a singular purpose: to protect their planet. The human spirit was unlike anything the Xhothra had ever encountered. Humanity did not rely on just technology or military might. They relied on something far more powerful, a collective will to survive. And the Xhothra began to realize that they were not just fighting an army, they were fighting a species determined to keep its place in the stars. The battle raged for days, and the sky above Earth was filled with flashes of fire and explosions. The Xhothra pushed forward relentlessly, but they were met with resistance at every turn. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and they were starting to lose their hold on Earth's orbit. The Xhothra commander, who had led the invasion, grew furious as their forces began to fall back. This was not how it was supposed to go. Their calculated victory was slipping through their fingers. They had expected a quick and decisive strike, but instead they found themselves embroiled in a protracted struggle, one they were not prepared for. Humanity was not folding under the pressure. It was rising to the occasion, and every battle fought and every defensive line held drove the Xhothra further into chaos. Their once perfect plans unraveled as humanity's determination to defend Earth only grew stronger with each passing hour. And when the first Xhothra warship was forced to retreat, the shockwaves rippled through their command structure. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had turned the tide of the war on their own homeworld, and the Xhothra knew they had made a grave mistake in underestimating this species. As the battle continued, the Xhothra were no longer sure they could win. They had come to Earth with the intent of crushing humanity and ending the rebellion once and for all, but instead they found themselves facing an enemy they could not defeat, an enemy whose spirit would not break and whose resolve would never falter. The Xhothra were not accustomed to failure. It was a concept they had never truly known. Their empire had expanded across the galaxy with precision and power. Every species they encountered had fallen before them. Their technology was unmatched, their tactics flawless. But as their forces began to falter over Earth, they realized they had miscalculated. They had underestimated humanity's strength, not just in terms of military might, but in the unyielding resolve that defined them. And now they were paying the price. The Xhothra commander watched in disbelief as their ships were forced into retreat. One by one, the coordinated resistance from Earth's forces had been too much even for their superior technology. The humans had found ways to outmaneuver them at every turn, and their adaptability had thrown off every calculation. The Xhothra had made. The humans were not just holding their own, they were forcing the invaders to abandon their ground. The Xhothra's entire strategy had hinged on the assumption that humanity would be crushed under the weight of their overwhelming force. But instead, Earth had become a symbol of resistance, a symbol of defiance against the tide of destruction. The Xhothra forces were no longer operating with the same confidence they had shown in the early days of the invasion. Now there was doubt and fear in their ranks, as their warships were damaged and their soldiers defeated. Humanity had proven that they could fight back, they could survive, and they could win the battle above. Earth raged on. But with every passing hour, the balance was tipping more and more in humanity's favor. As the last of the Xhothra's ships retreated from Earth's orbit, the humans began to regroup and rebuild their forces. They had won the battle for their homeworld, but the war was far from over. The Xhothra were not the kind of enemies who would simply give up. They would return stronger and more determined. But humanity now knew that they had the strength to resist. They had proven their worth in the galaxy, and they had proven that they could unite in the face of annihilation. The galaxy watched as humanity stood tall in the aftermath of the battle. Earth was scared, but it had survived, and the rest of the galaxy took notice. The once dismissed species had become a force to be reckoned with. The coalition recognized the power of the humans, and they began to reach out for further alliances, no longer viewing them as a primitive species, but as key players in the fight against the Xathra with Earth's victory. The coalition began to rebuild and expand. The human role in the war became central. No longer would they be ignored, no longer would they be underestimated. The humans had earned their place at the table, and they had shown the galaxy that even in the darkest of times when all hope seemed lost, there was always a chance for survival and victory. Humanity's success was a rallying cry to every species that had been oppressed by the Xathra. Those who had once feared the invaders now looked to humanity for leadership. Humanity had not only survived the Xathra's wrath, they had shown the galaxy that the Xathra could be defeated, and that the light of resistance would never be snuffed out. As the war continued and the Xathra forces regrouped, humanity's resolve remained unbroken. They had proven their strength, not just in battle but in spirit, and with every victory they moved closer to a future where the galaxy would be free once again, and humanity would be its protector.